about to have. Many of you out there might be horror fans, so we're talking about H.P. Lovecraft. He was born in Rhode Island, and we're talking about some fact, some fiction, a mix of both. So I'd like to introduce author Paul Lafarge. He's the author of The Night Ocean. It's a novel, and he is joining us here at the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. Paul, come on in.
Hey, Molly.
Hi, so good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, thank you so much. So you're actually going to do this interview, and then you're headed up the road because you're going to be speaking at the Providence Athenaeum from 5 to 7. So if people are interested in getting this book and hearing you speak, you're doing that tonight from 5 to 7 and getting your autograph as well as signing the book.
Yes,
So.
happy to sign books and answer questions.
Great, great. So tell us a little. So a lot of people here are fascinated with H.P. Lovecraft, you know, being from here. So tell us a little bit about how you got introduced to H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, sure. I was a Lovecraft fan as a kid. I was a kind of nerdy kid, and I played the game Dungeons and Dragons. And through that game, I stumbled on H.P. Lovecraft's imaginary universe, and I thought, this sounds so terrible and awful and horrible. I really want to read all of it. So I ran out, I got Lovecraft's books, I tore through his fiction, and I got completely engrossed by his horrific vision of the universe. I should just say, I was like a kid growing up in New York City, late 1970s, early 1980s, and Lovecraft's idea of the universe is that we're all doomed. We're doomed. There are horrible alien beings out there. They're much more powerful than we are. We don't really stand a chance against them. That kind of sounded right to me.
Okay. You're like, yeah, I can.
It sounds about like how the world is going to go. So I enjoyed reading his work because it was horrible and also because it resonated with something in me, you know, this kid who was like a little afraid. It was the era of the day after, and, you know, the evil empire of the Soviet Union and all of these kind of cosmic fears. And so Lovecraft for me was a way to have fun with that experience of being a scared, nerdy kid.
A scared, nerdy kid. So you could relate. I'm just going to refresh here and see. If you have any questions, definitely let us know so we can get you in on the conversation. So I'm just going to pull that up so we can see if anybody's writing in.
Sure, yeah.
So this is really a story within a story, and you're really bringing in some scandal, you're bringing in a secret life of Lovecraft. So tell us a little bit about The Night Ocean and really why you decided to tackle this.
Okay, sure. So the idea for the book came from a story that a friend of mine told me, the poet and novelist Robert Kelly, having dinner with him one night. And we started talking about Lovecraft, and he said, did you know, in the summer of 1934, H.P. Lovecraft left Providence, which he hardly ever left, and he went to spend about 2 months staying with a young fan named Robert Barlow in Central Florida. And this was unusual. Lovecraft didn't spend 2 months with anybody. He really loved Providence. He liked his apartment. He lived with his aunt. You know, he was a homebody in a lot of ways. So for him to spend that much time in someone else's house was striking.
A stranger.
A stranger was a stranger he'd met through the mail, but nonetheless a stranger. And the other thing that made this story unusual was that in the summer of 1934, H.P. Lovecraft was 43, Barlow had just turned 16. So you think, okay, why did Lovecraft want to spend 2 months in the middle of nowhere? This town is outside of Orlando, but it's not even really outside of Orlando. It's outside something else, which is outside Orlando. There's nothing there, and there was even less there in 1934. Why was Lovecraft drawn to this person, to this place? What was the experience that he had there? What was the nature of their friendship? You know, where did it go? How did it change them? Which is a question novelists are always asking. You know, how do things change people? What happens to you if you go through some particular strange experience? So I got interested in that story, and I read more about the life of Robert Barlow. I knew a little bit about Lovecraft, and I learned that Barlow is just a fascinating person in his own right. He was Lovecraft's friend. He was Lovecraft's literary executor, briefly. And then after Lovecraft died, he moved to California. He became an experimental poet. And then he moved to Mexico City and became this enormously important scholar of the civilization and language of the Aztecs.
And fascinating life.
He had a fascinating life. He died young, tragically. He committed suicide at the age of 32.
That's very young. Yeah.
But in that brief period of time, his friendship with Lovecraft started when he was probably 13, a couple of years before they met in person. So in 20 years, he lived in the world of weird fiction, which was Lovecraft's world. He lived in the world of poetry. And he was a very important anthropologist and linguist and educator. So I wanted to tell the story because I had this childhood fascination with Lovecraft, but also because Barlow is so interesting. I wanted to write about him. I wanted him to be a character. And I'll say one more Barlow fact, which is that when he lived in Mexico City, he taught at a school called Mexico City College, and one of his students there was the young William S. Burroughs, who went on to write Naked Lunch and all of these other books. He's sort of, Barlow is like a hub. His life passes through the lives of all of these other people who are interesting and important in American literature in the 20th century. So I thought this will be a good subject for a book, and that's how this got started.
And so you really have this connection within this book and really spinning it in a way where people are drawn in and you can see this. And you did some research. How much of research did you put into this? Because you're weaving a story, but you're also inputting some fact and some fiction into it. How much research did you do for this?
Well, let's see. I began by going down to Central Florida and finding Barlow's house and sneaking into it. So there was no one there. There were big no trespassing signs, but it was clearly a kind of semi-abandoned property. And I thought there was nobody around.
Well, it's technically
the front door was. I think I'm not gonna weigh in on that. The front door was locked. The back door was open. I thought I'll just go take a peek. So I went there. I saw that place. I went to Mexico and saw the places where Barlow had lived and worked, and some of the other places that were important to him there. I came to Providence several times, and I actually got to see the inside of one of the apartments where Lovecraft lived, which was fascinating, just to see the room where he worked and all that. And then I spent about 9 months in the New York Public Library reading about Lovecraft and Barlow and the circle of their friends and the sort of generation that followed them, their disciples, who were also very interesting people. And many of them were so interesting, I thought, okay, I've got to include them in the book also. They're part of this story that I wanted to tell.
That's just incredible, the amount of time and effort and the trips that you put into this. And it really shows through the work itself and really the tale that you weave, but you're also exploring the relationship that you have. And what kind of relationship do you think that they had?
It's a very complicated thing. And if you're looking for a sort of like, a scandal, and you want to find the smoking gun that says, oh, there was this scandal, or oh, there was no scandal, you can't find it. All you find is nuance. I think Barlow felt very strongly attached to Lovecraft. I think whether he was in love with Lovecraft or whether, of course he was in love. There's so many kinds of love.
Yeah, and when you're 16 and you're looking up to someone.
Lovecraft was enormously important for Barlow, and after Lovecraft died, Barlow would write poem after poem, sort of saying, "Oh, I miss Lovecraft."
Wow.
Lovecraft is a more complicated person. I think he felt a warm friendship towards Barlow. He was impressed by Barlow's many talents. He was a writer and a painter and a sculptor and did a lot of other things, and Lovecraft found that very, very impressive. And he liked to spend time around Barlow. Barlow was energetic and fun and did a lot of things, and Lovecraft was kind of a hermit, and this drew him out of his shell.
That's incredible how you were able to do all this research and really delve into the characters. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the type of person that Lovecraft was. It's widely known that he was racist.
Yeah.
And you really do address that in your novel within the first few pages.
Yeah.
Really, what is it like to be able to personally write about someone who was a racist, and how do you really decipher that from him and his works?
Okay, well, first of all, so one thing to say is that Lovecraft expressed, he wrote some horrible things in his letters. He wrote about his dislike for black people, for Jews, for Asian Americans, for Poles, for French Catholics. He was really, he had a very broad spectrum of hatred.
Yeah.
He was a xenophobe, he didn't like immigrants. There were a lot of people on his bad list. In his life, he was married to a Ukrainian Jewish refugee, and many of his friends were gay Jewish men. So he was a believer in some fairly ugly theories about the world and about culture and about civilization. But in his life, he was a little more live and let live. So he's a complicated person, is I think the first thing to say. The second thing is that complicated people are great from a novelist's point of view, because then you get to ask questions like, why does this person act like this? How did he reconcile the contradictions of his belief and his biography? And how did he turn all of this really venomous stuff that he wrote, mostly as a younger man, but some through his whole life? How did he turn all this, just this bile, into fiction that anyone cares about and that people still read and that's actually interesting and maybe even a little moving for people who are not themselves horrible racists? So there are a bunch of really interesting questions you get to ask, and one of the reasons I wanted to make him a character is so that I could spend a while with those questions.
Yeah, and that was kind of my question to you as a follow-up, is because he was a racist and because he wrote terrible things, is that the kind of person that he was, does that make him more of an interesting character?
Mm-hmm.
And along the lines with that is, should you give him more notoriety? But does it give him...
I'm not worried about giving Lovecraft more notoriety. He's so well known now. His books continue to be reprinted and new editions of them come out, and there are Lovecraftian video games and movies, and there's the Necronomicon, which happens in Providence every couple summers.
Yeah, we have a store right over in the arcade.
I believe that the organizer of that conference is the same person, Niels Hobbs, who runs the conference. Who runs the store, sorry. And it's like a great celebration of Lovecraft and things Lovecraftian, but of course with the awareness that Lovecraft had a complicated and problematic biography, and that we have to be aware of that when we're talking about him. So I'm not worried about giving notoriety to Lovecraft. Good luck to me if I could do that. That would be a nice trick.
And I think the way you said it is having this be a complex character.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my question, is seeing that because he has all these sides and bringing it into a complex character for this novel, which I think is well done. And I kind of wanted to touch base with you on just the fact that the way that you introduce things, the way you continue things through the story, is it really is a story within a story.
Yeah.
You do that. And you do that in a way that's sort of Lovecraftian.
A little bit. I did read a lot of Lovecraft, and I learned something about plotting from him. He's a very good plotter, and he has a very great sense of pacing, of timing, of dramatic timing, and how to structure revelations so that you feel like you're moving closer and closer to the horrible truth. Lovecraft is amazing at that, and I tried to learn a little bit from him. But I wanted to start a little ways out from the kind of the central mystery of Lovecraft and Barlow, so that the book could speak to people who aren't already immersed in Lovecraft's writing and in his life. And you can start from the outside. You don't have to know who Lovecraft was. You don't have to know anything about Barlow. You can just start and then kind of pick up the thread at the beginning and follow it into the labyrinth.
So really, you can not know anything about horror, you can not know anything about Lovecraft, you can be a total outside party and pick this up and really enjoy it.
My hope is that people who do know Lovecraft's work will enjoy this book, but also that it's not especially a book for Lovecraft fans. It's just a book about complicated people and their complicated lives.
And it is actually, I started reading it have enjoyed it so far. I didn't make it through, I'm sorry. I'm not that quick of a reader,
okay.
but I have enjoyed it so far. So really enjoyable. And you will be speaking here shortly. So if anybody is interested, they can go see you at the Providence Athenaeum from 5 to 7. So we appreciate you being here in
Molly,
Providence.
thank you so much.
Such a pleasure.
It's
Thank
great
you so
to meet
much.
you. Thank
Let's
you.
take a picture here quickly.
Okay.
Before we move on to our next guest. Want to have this?
Oh.
That's great. I
That's
hope
a
I can
good
keep
one.
this so I can finish it.
Absolutely.
'Cause
I hope you can too.
Okay,
Let me know
thank
what
you
you
so
think.
much.
Okay, thank
Paul,
you,
I really
Molly.
appreciate it. Thank you
Okay.
so much for joining us.